This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage.
Hey, Ohio State fans, Alex Gleitman here, back with another edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. This week was supposed to be the Michigan Week podcast. We were supposed to have a few of our friends from the state up north come on to preview the game, but the game will not be happening as the Wolverines are having COVID-19 issues within their program. So instead, we'll talk about kind of what's happened since the Wolverines canceled the game earlier this week. Ohio State has been voted into the Big Ten championship by the Big Ten, and we're going to have a couple guests on the show to discuss that topic. The first is Pete Thamel from Yahoo Sports, host of the College Football Podcast on Yahoo Sports. Pete, thanks for joining the show today. Really appreciate you coming on.
Alex, thanks for having me, man. It's been a crazy week.
It absolutely has. We've been trying to figure out, since last weekend, when we knew Michigan, this was a possibility, what was going to happen. We had heard Ohio State sources inside the athletic department were optimistic that there would be a game, but I think there was a number of different scenarios, which we could go into later as to why maybe that didn't happen. And instead, the Big Ten voted earlier this week to amend the rule of a 6-game minimum to play in the Big Ten championship, kind of taking Indiana out of that spot against Northwestern and putting Ohio State into it. I mean, obviously, I know you're pretty connected to this thing. You've been pretty spot on reporting on the Big Ten throughout this whole season and just in general. What, to your knowledge, kind of take us inside the Big Ten's decision to amend that rule and put Ohio State in the Big Ten championship next week over Indiana?
Yeah, I think any conversation about this actually really starts where this should have been amended a couple weeks ago, right? Because this became such a huge thing and really hit such a pressure point because the fact it was Ohio State and everything was on the line. Like the lack of anticipation that this could have happened to me was an error, because if you had just amended the rules to say head to head maybe matters over this, if there's just one game being played between the two, again, they had to put rules and standards in place when they started, but a lot of times, especially in COVID times, those rules don't match the realities. And I really feel like when you look back at this, that was a miss by the league to not anticipate this. And then all of a sudden, this rule becomes like the searing focus of the entire sports world. And that's really when the trouble started.
Yeah, I don't think that the Big Ten leadership anticipated this many games being canceled throughout the season. And obviously, because of the decisions that were made before their 8-game season started, there was no room for error. And, so they already had changed the rules once. They then changed their schedule again twice. And to me, I mean, I think a big reason, I know a lot of Indiana fans are upset, but to me, even if Ohio State played this weekend and they lost to Michigan or anyone else, they'd still be in the Big Ten championship game. So to me, them changing the rule at this point isn't that big of a deal. I agree. It probably should have been revisited probably at the middle of the season when a few teams were having some issues. But in your opinion, why do you think the Big Ten ultimately decided to make the decision? Was this a money and business decision, just getting Ohio State their best chance to make the college football playoff, which is obviously good financially for the conference in a year where a lot of these schools are bleeding their athletic departments? Was it because of what I said, Ohio State already clinched? Was it, something else?
So one thing, Alex, I think is interesting is a lot of people went after the money angle of this. The difference between a school making the semi and then a school making a New Year's Six Bowl is only $2 million. So again, I'm not going to sneeze at $2 million, but this wasn't like some insane, crazy, overt, there wasn't $25 million at stake or something like that, where then every school in the league would obviously be getting around 2 million. So once you take $2 million and chop it up 14 ways, again, it's a pandemic. There's certainly, I don't want to dismiss that, but I don't think that's going to dictate a lot of decisions in that way. So I think somewhat the financial piece of this got a little bit maybe just overinflated and was misunderstood in all of it. The next piece and why they did it, I think it just comes down to common sense and fairness. When we broke the story about the vote kind of happening, it was explained to me this way: if Ohio State had lost to Michigan, they they still would have owned the tiebreaker with Indiana. So even if Ohio State had lost, they still had an edge on Indiana because of head-to-head. So to limit them in a way because of the number of games played is clear. And look, Indiana wasn't happy about it, but if you read their statement, like they accepted it. There's ways to make statements and be like, "We're pissed and we're going to let you know we're pissed." Their statement said, "We're pissed, but we get it." Does that make sense? Like they protested, but they did not kick and scream behind the scenes. They knew what the realities were. If they had won the head to head and it became this, that is something where this would have been heavily contested. But I don't think any other athletic directors in the league really were like, it would have been good business or common sense to box Ohio State out over some, essentially shotgun rule that was made amid a flurry of the pandemic earlier this year.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said, if Ohio State played this weekend and they lost, they would still be in the Big Ten championship. So they may not be going to college football playoff, but I think it's a little bit easier for Indiana, except that even though they're probably upset because this might be their only chance in a little while to potentially get to that game. That said, why was not obviously they decided to go ahead with this vote and put Ohio State through after deciding that giving Ohio State another game this weekend was not a viable option. Because if that was a viable option, they would have just given Ohio State, that other game and that's it. But from what I understand, I know in talking to our sources in the Ohio State athletic department, I think they were hopeful there was going to be a game. Either Michigan was going to get to play, Minnesota would cancel, maybe the conference would do some shuffling early in the week and maybe give Rutgers to Nebraska and Ohio State would get Maryland. Or once it came out that Purdue was having COVID issues, could there be some sort of shuffling to give Indiana a different game and Ohio State some sort of other opponent? But that obviously didn't happen. Why, in your opinion, was getting Ohio State another game, a sixth game in the regular season, not a viable option for the conference?
Well, the timing of how Michigan's decision came handcuffed them from doing that. And from talking to multiple coaches around the league on that Wednesday when things were coming down, nobody wanted a new opponent at that point, right? Like it just wasn't going to happen that way. I thought perhaps, everyone thought they're going to end up playing Indiana, but I thought perhaps the more realistic option was with Minnesota is like wheezing into this Nebraska game. They've been ravaged by COVID. So maybe they said, "Hey, Minnesota, don't, you can sit this one out and get ready for Wisconsin, your rivalry game next week." And Nebraska plays Ohio State in a rematch, which nobody really wanted to do, quite frankly. But again, that would have just been forcing a game to make your made up qualification, right? Like, so I just think common sense won out. Like, why make some shotgun game out of this when in reality, like this is the right and fair thing to do. So I think the Big Ten handled this about as well as it could. It was just a little slow on the draw.
Yeah, it makes sense. And, it's pretty crazy. It's been a mess of a season, I think, across the board. Some people are even saying, I don't want to say that it's a fake season, but a lot of casual college football fans that I come across, or even, not even casual fans. I was with a Tennessee fan the other day, and obviously they're not having a great season, but he said it has nothing to do with my team being bad. I just can't get into college football just because there's a game being canceled every week in a major conference. And it just seems like there should be an asterisk on whoever wins it this year. It doesn't matter. I mean, my thought is, yes, it's been a mess, but you still might get Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Clemson potentially in the college football playoff, maybe even Florida in there. 4 very, very viable teams that might have made it, whether there was COVID or not. So I think as long as there's no serious misses in the playoff as far as personnel goes that would alter the outcomes of those games, I still think it's a valid champion. I mean, what are your thoughts on this college football season, having covered it from start to almost finish here? Is there an asterisk to some extent on this year's champion? How do you feel about that?
I mean, honestly, Alex, I really feel like it's the opposite of an asterisk. This season has been harder in so many different ways to figure out. And I really think, and I wrote about this on Yahoo this week, the sacrifice the players have made, I don't think has been appreciated enough by the people who sat down on Saturdays and watched those players as an escape. I mean, those players have lived in isolation. All the perks that come with playing college football, other than the scholarship and everything, are basically wiped away. And like the Boston College athletic director told me today. He's like, these kids haven't hugged their parents in 6 or 7 months. So I really feel like I don't think there is going to be an asterisk. I think this champion is obviously going to resonate as being maybe more special than the champion of a typical season because of everything that they've endured. What you have to hope is that the playoffs can avoid COVID issues, right? Like bowl season's a mess. Like BC, as we're taping this here on Thursday evening, BC pulled out of a bowl. A bunch of people are going to do that. If you're a middling team, like there's really not a ton of motivation to go play a game right now. God bless them if they do. I'll watch them all. But at the end of the day, I don't really see that as, I don't really see every bowl slot being filled in a traditional manner. Now, look, like Liberty's excited, right? Because, the teams left out on the other side are going to maybe go find slots to play in. But yeah, I really feel like if the playoff can avoid, and if they could bubble it somehow or whatever, these kids are not going home for Christmas, right? Like that's not happening. Like Christmas is gone; it's off the table, and that's sort of the latest sacrifice of many that they've made over this period. The players have made over this period of time. So, so I really think if you go and look at the arc of the season, I can't say in any way it's been diminished.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I didn't really think about it like that. I mean, it's obviously no brainer. It's certainly harder. All the challenges that these coaches have faced, especially in the Big Ten, with your season's on and it's amended and now it's canceled and now it's back on, and it's been no spring ball. I mean, it's been absolutely crazy. I agree with you. I think there's going to be a ton of bowl games that are, I don't want to say canceled, but maybe the people who are going to be in that game are kind of opting out. You might get to see, if Rutgers wins this weekend at 3-5, Rutgers might be bowling when they might not normally be bowling. And, for a program like that, for similar reasons as BC, you would think maybe they opt out, but they haven't been bowling in a while. So I imagine Greg Schiano would certainly take any bowl game. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Last thing before I let you go, just because I know you've been somewhat close to Ohio State, I know the staff under Urban Meyer greatly respected you, and obviously same with Ryan Day. I mean, just want you to talk about a little bit. You've been close to seeing this transition. It's now 2 years of Ryan Day as the full-time head coach, past the Urban Meyer era. What are your thoughts on both the present and future health of the Ohio State program with Ryan Day as the head coach?
It's a really good question. I live in Boston, Alex, so I got to know Ryan Day when he was the offensive coordinator at Boston College a long time ago. So I've just had a chance to get to know him. Would chat with him when he was in the NFL at times, and know him as part of that Chip Kelly tree. Obviously, that was it's been a really prolific and fun part of college football for the past decade or so since Chip got to Oregon, and I had a lot of confidence in Ryan Day when Urban stepped down and Gene Smith passed the baton to him. But also, I wasn't naive. There were going to be leaps and there were questions. I mean, when Ohio State hired Urban Meyer, he'd won multiple national championships. He'd gone undefeated at Utah. Like, he had seen it all from that head coaching chair. All right. Now, Ryan Day just didn't have any of that experience in gravitas. And there was going to be an adjustment period. But I really think, like, if you step back and look at the almost 2 years now that Ryan Day has been in charge at Ohio State, like, one of the many things that's impressed me is there's been very few missteps, right? He's got a microphone shoved in front of him. I mean, look, to ask a question at an Ohio State press conference, you need to take a deli ticket, for crying out loud, right? Like, with the amount of scrutiny on him and the amount of pressure to replace Urban, I just think one thing that stood out to me is how few missteps he's had. Like, I can't think of, I'm sure he's said something wrong here or there a little bit, but I just can't think of any self-induced controversies that you see a lot of maybe younger coaches making. And I think it's a testament to his just raw intellect. He's a very bright guy, and he's very smart in what he says and how he puts himself out there. The second part, go ahead. You were about to say something? No,
I was going to say, I agree. Having gotten to know the guy a little bit, he's a very impressive human being. I mean, the first time I spoke to him, you're like, this guy's going to be an elite head coach just because of the type of guy he is and just how smart he is and how he cultivates relationships and things like that. So 1,000% just agree with you there.
Yeah, he's very steady. That would be probably the word I would describe Ryan. He's very intense, but he's very steady. He's also very secure. Like I've seen insecurity eat up a lot of younger coaches. Quite frankly, the insecure ones are the ones who call reporters more, right? Because they want validation. They want to, they want to let their anxieties go. Ryan has been very secure. Now he's thoughtful. Relies on his mentors. He calls around, and he doesn't do anything. He's not cocky with how he's gone about things, but I do think he's very secure. Here's where I think we knew schematically Ohio State was going to be in good hands. Just in terms of Ryan as a play caller, I think he's an elite play caller. I think he's one of the best ones in football, period. And obviously, with the talent advantage Ohio State has, and really, he was left with quite a remarkable stable of talent from Urban Meyer. He did go get Justin Fields. I don't know if he gets enough credit for that, quite frankly, because last season isn't what it was without Justin Fields on that roster, and certainly this season isn't either. The doomsday scenario for Ryan was always Justin Fields getting hurt. Now, like, knock on all kinds of wood that Justin's been able to stay upright and healthy. I know Buckeye Nation gives a collective wince every time Justin takes a hit, because there's good young talent in that quarterback room, but it's not experienced talent. It's just good young talent. So so that part I was not too concerned about. He's hired good staff. Jeff Hafley was certainly a good hire. We'll see how this defense holds up the next couple of weeks here when they start getting tested, maybe on higher levels, Northwestern and beyond. But I really think when you look at where Ryan Day has maybe outkicked his coverage, or outkicked what I thought might be some of his limitations early, is in recruiting. I really feel like part of the reason Urban Meyer was such a successful recruiter was, A, he worked at it harder than maybe any head coach I've ever been around. But B, there was an aura of Urban Meyer. He could walk in a living room in the Dallas area. He could walk in a living room in Southern California, and people knew who he was. They wanted to ask about Tim Tebow. He's almost like a pop culture figure. Like, people's grandmothers could pick him out of a lineup. And Ryan Day just didn't have that cachet. Like, he just simply didn't. That cachet is earned through, just decades of experience of being in front of the college football populace. Like, I would imagine Ryan Day and most of America could walk around right now with a Red Sox hat on, and most people wouldn't recognize him. That's just, and so to be able to keep the recruiting machine buzzing at the level and caliber that he's kept it at, to me, it's not shocking, but it's certainly surprising. Like, I had thought they may have to adjust, maybe a little more Tressel model, local kids, 3 starts, build them up. I mean, he has kept this program stocked with talent. And when people would have looked at you mentioned you were supposed to have some Michigan folks on to talk about Ohio State Michigan game this year. The reason why Ohio State is so far ahead of Michigan right now is very simple. It's pure raw talent, dead simple, and that distinct talent advantage is not going away. Like, Ryan Day has continued that. You can maybe even argue furthered it in some ways. Not only is Ohio State dominating the Midwest, like, Michigan isn't even in the recruiting battles with them right now. So when you look at the Day era holistically, Alex, to me, that's perhaps the most impressive part. We knew they were going to score points. We knew he was going to call great plays. But did we know he could go get 5-star defensive linemen like Zach Harrison? Brings in Kerry Coombs, who restocks the secondary immediately with elite players. Did we know he could go into Texas and get 5-star quarterbacks, 5-star receivers like he has? So that, to me, has really been a distinct upgrade from what I may have perceived. I certainly didn't think they were going to have a MAC-rated recruiting class, right? It's Ohio State. But to keep Ohio State as a vibrant national recruiting brand is really impressive.
I agree. I'm a recruiting guy, and 1,000% agree. I also write for Rutgers site, and on those message boards, those guys are, trying to figure out their chances in 5 years and saying Ohio State's going to be on the down. And I say, guys, I know that, you think it's all about the cupboard being full with Urban Meyer, but it's not slowing down. And, by the time someone listens to this podcast, they might have picked up another 5-star wide receiver from the Washington area in Emeka Egbuka. He's scheduled to make his announcement on Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So be sure to tune into Buckeye Scoop for that. But that's the first part of our segment of this edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage. Thank you, Pete Thamel. You guys can follow Pete on Twitter at Pete Thamel. You can also listen to the College Football Podcast on Yahoo Sports, of which he is one of the hosts. Go check it out, download, subscribe. Pete, thanks for joining the show. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Alex, thank you, buddy.
This episode of Around the Oval is brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage.
Welcome back to this edition of Around the Oval, brought to you by Todd Pennington with Revolution Mortgage on Buckeye Scoop. We are back here after the break, bringing you another college football insider on the national level, senior writer for college football for ESPN, ESPN Plus, ESPN.com, Adam Rittenberg. Adam, appreciate you joining the show. Thanks for your time tonight.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It was obviously a big week for you. We just got done actually talking with Pete Thamel about the Big Ten's decision to amend the minimum game requirement for Ohio State to be able to play in the Big Ten championship against Northwestern next week. But you were the guy who kind of led the charge in breaking that news earlier in the week. Walk us a little bit through kind of the process. To your knowledge, how did that whole decision come about?
Well, what's kind of interesting, Alex, is that even though this was something that was discussed, and I'm sure you talked about it, I talked about it, a lot of us in the media, I spoke to multiple athletic directors in the Big Ten that said they did not formally discuss this until Wednesday. Now, that was the group that had created this rule back in before the restarted season, along with coaches and other administrators from their schools and from the conference. But they were the ones that were going to have to change it, and they really didn't talk about it collectively, at least in a formal setting, until Wednesday morning. And I think at that point, the overriding part of the discussion is the fact that Ohio State did not need to play its way into the championship game by winning. If that was the case, I don't think they're changing this rule. And sure, Buckeye fans would have been upset, but the fact is, Ohio State didn't even need to win a game; they just needed to play a game to get in. And I think that was the even Indiana can kind of come around to that way of thinking. And I understand the disappointment on the IU side, but I spoke to one of their coaches today who said, "Hey, Ohio State, we lost to them. They've shown to be the best team in the league. If we'd beaten them, obviously it'd be a different discussion." But I think that's what it ultimately came down to, is that when a team is not having to earn its way in with that sixth game, what are we doing here? And then it just made it easier, I think, for them to make that adjustment.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I saw a lot on Twitter, Indiana fans upset about the decision. And, obviously this was kind of I don't want to say once in a lifetime, but once in a really long time since they've been this good type of opportunity for them. And who knows when things hopefully go back to normal next year. And, Michigan's not in a losing record and Penn State's not in a losing record potentially. Like, will they have this opportunity for the foreseeable future? For me, I agree with you. I think it was, if Ohio State played Michigan and lost this weekend, they were still in the Big Ten championship because they beat Indiana head to head. And I guess my question to you is, was it as simple in your mind? I mean, we don't know for sure, we weren't in that room, but was it as simple as the ADs deciding to make the vote because of that? Was there a money business decision, type of thing to get the Big Ten a potential college football playoff candidate in Ohio State? Was it the latest COVID outbreaks kind of being a little bit crazy? Like, do you think there was anything else besides as simple of a fact as, Ohio State beat Indiana, and even if they played this weekend, they were still in that game?
Yeah, that was definitely the driving force, Alex. But I would say that everybody in the room knows where Ohio State's ranked in the CFP. I mean, you have Gary Barta from Iowa, who I guess recused himself from the vote, which is understandable, but he's the chairman of the CFP selection committee, which puts together that top 25 every week. So Barry Alvarez from Wisconsin had been vocal about, Ohio State is number 4. Let's do what we need to do to support them. And I think that's important. I think it's something the Big Ten maybe doesn't do as well as other conferences. And I'm not saying that's the reason they haven't won very many national championships, but you get what you emphasize. And I think this is a moment where the Big Ten made the right decision and gave its best team the best chance to get in the college football playoff. And it's not a financial windfall, honestly, when you look at all the money that's coming into the conference just from being part of the playoff, but it is something. And I think that was part of it. The other thing too, I spoke to a Big Ten athletic director right around the time or shortly after Indiana announced that it had paused team activities. I guess this would have been Tuesday night. And that this person had a reaction, like, okay, well, if Indiana's pausing and they may be out for 2 weeks, then what are we talking about here? I mean, if Ohio State's healthy enough to play this week, hopefully they're healthy enough to play next week. We know Indiana, unfortunately, not healthy enough to play this week against Purdue, and there's a decent chance they're not healthy enough to play a game next week, which is unfortunate because I'd love to see them out on the field again. But I think that also may be factored in, not as a major driver, but part of the discussion.
Yeah, I agree. We're hearing on our end at Buckeye Scoop that we were hearing before that even dropped, that Indiana has a situation that's pretty bad. And I don't even know, to your point, I don't know if they're going to be able to play next week, which I agree. It stinks because I would love to see them in a New Year's Six bowl. I
think they'll get back for that. I do think they'll make the New Year's Six, but I would echo that there's real pessimism about playing I guess it would be an 8th game next week.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a bummer. They've had a tremendous year, incredible what Tom Allen's done. But, I think that's a good segue into the next question I had. For me, I was hearing and speaking with Ohio State athletic department people ahead of the weekend, kind of heading into the Michigan State weekend, that, they felt obviously confident they were going to play that game. And then they felt confident that they were going to play a game this weekend. They thought that it would either be Michigan getting their stuff in order, or the Big Ten would do some shuffling. And, to me, I think that was definitely a possibility, but it's obviously tough to turn around and prepare for an opponent in just a few days' time. So I think timing had to do a little bit to it. But then I think, Minnesota decided that they were going to play this week, which probably took away one path to that. And then both Indiana and Purdue were both knocked out with COVID issues. Do you think, I guess, why wasn't getting Ohio State another game a viable option for the conference?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple that the numbers didn't work out because you would have had to have removed another healthy team from being able to play. And if someone wasn't willing to remove themselves, the Big Ten's not just going to say, in Minnesota, you can't play, or Rutgers, you can't play. But I think, again, if the numbers, if either Purdue or Indiana was good, or if Minnesota was out, then you'd have that opportunity for Ohio State. I mean, the one thing the Big Ten was not going to go back on, and actually this is something even though I think they should have allowed non-conference games all along, I would have criticized them roundly if on the last weekend of the season they decided to go back on that, because they were the first conference, if you remember back in July, to announce a conference-only schedule. And they did that without notifying the other leagues, got a lot of criticism for it. Then when Nebraska was trying to add a non-conference opponent, when Wisconsin canceled, they wouldn't allow that. And so I'd love to see Ohio State against Texas A&M this week. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would have been awesome, but that would have been, beyond hypocrisy if the Big Ten did that. And it would just fuel the belief among some that Ohio State gets special treatment. So that was the one thing, even though, again, I'm in favor of it, but that's one thing you got to stick to. With this rule that was created a few months ago and was adjusted, again, not for a terrible reason, that's something that I think we all can live with.
Yeah, and I think, to our earlier points, if it wasn't a situation where, like, if either Indiana had beaten Ohio State head to head and this game, they were still a game up, or if, the results of Ohio State's game this weekend would have mattered to who went to Indianapolis, I think we would be talking about a very different argument here, but we're not. And, now Ohio State at 5-0 is going to sit out this week. They're going to prepare for Northwestern. I assume they'll probably be, something around a 20, 21 point favorite maybe in that game. They'll definitely be at least a 2-score plus favorite in that game. Let's just, for hypothetical purposes, say they win. They're 6-0. They're currently 4th in the college football playoff. Obviously, championship weekend is big. Clemson's going to be playing Notre Dame. Alabama's going to be playing number 6 Florida. Texas A&M will not be playing. But, Adam, what, in your mind, what is Ohio State's chances to make the college football playoff if they go 6-0 as the Big Ten champions? Do you think it's as simple as they're in that case, or how do you see this thing playing out?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're in right now at number 4 at 5-0, and the fact that the team behind them isn't playing a game either this weekend, as Texas A&M's game was canceled, leads me to believe that they'll most likely be number 4 again, going into the final set of the rankings. And so, to me, the only way that they get knocked out, if they are to beat Northwestern, like you said, and they are 20-point favorites as openers, would be if Florida beats Alabama, and if Clemson beats Notre Dame in a close game, and then that could be your 4. Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida, Alabama, Ohio State's left out. So as long as either Notre Dame beats Clemson again, which would knock Clemson out, or Alabama beats Florida, which would knock Florida out, Ohio State's going to get in a playoff if they beat Northwestern. I just don't see enough from behind them leapfrogging, because A&M doesn't have that opportunity against Tennessee, who's not a very good team next week, whereas Ohio State, presuming Northwestern beats Illinois and they're a double-digit favorite this week, they will be 6-1. They will probably be close to the top 10 in the next CFP ranking. So that's another resume builder, whereas A&M doesn't get that. And even if Cincinnati, which has been off seemingly forever, beats Tulsa in the AAC title game, I don't see them vaulting into the top 4. Iowa State moved to 7 this week, but you're not putting a 2-loss Iowa State team ahead of an undefeated Ohio State team. So it's really simple. It's as simple as that for Ohio State. Root for Alabama, root for Notre Dame, and then if one of those goes your way and the other one doesn't, you're probably still getting in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the scenario everyone, that's an Ohio State fan is scared about. I still think, it's going to be interesting. Is a non-conference champion Notre Dame at, what would they be, 10-1 in over a conference champion Ohio State at 6-0? It's going to be interesting.
Well, remember, they are a conference champion. They would be a conference. Oh, you're talking about if they lose a game. Oh, okay.
If they lose.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in the normal mindset. Yeah. I mean, I think Notre Dame would be a very interesting test case, right? So Clemson, I think, is a 7-point favorite opening against Notre Dame. If they beat them by a significant margin, what does that do for Notre Dame? They basically, if they didn't get in, it would be on the basis strictly of one game, which I think is tough for the committee, right? Because Notre Dame's, they're 10-0. They have a real body of work. They have a win against Clemson. They have, I think, a really good win against North Carolina, which hasn't really moved much, and they're holding steady around 17 or 18. So if you don't put them in, you're putting them out on the basis of one game. That's a tough thing to do when you're talking about a team that put together a really good body of work. So it would have to be something like, 40-point loss, I think, for Notre Dame to be knocked out on the basis of that one game.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be to you is, it's like for us, it's like, being blindfolded, trying to throw darts at a dartboard and figure out what the committee's actually going to do to some extent. So my question was going to be, how large of a margin of victory does it have to be for Clemson over Notre Dame? For Notre Dame, for them to be like, yep, Notre Dame's not a top 4 team. Like this was their shot. And to me, I think within 14 points is respectable. That's where I'm at. I think anything more than that, you start to get a little nervous if you're Notre Dame. Is there a number? I mean, you just said 40, but I don't think you really think it's 40. But is there a number there that you think where Notre Dame's sitting there saying, we're in trouble here?
Yeah, I think it's more what you said, that they don't look like a top 4 team. I mean, this is the night test year. And that's what, the Ohio State last week, despite having a lot of players out, looked like a top 4 team. Notre Dame, I think, has looked like a top 4 team to this point in the season. And, no matter what happens against Clemson this time, you can't discount the fact that they beat them. I mean, yes, Trevor Lawrence was out, but DJ Uiagalelei put up a record passing total against Notre Dame.
It had nothing to do with that. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, Trevor Lawrence could do that again, and maybe the game goes a little differently. But I think you can't discount the fact that Notre Dame won that game. And if you watch that game, I was there. Notre Dame was the better team most of that night. They really could have won that game in regulation. They didn't. They had to win it in overtime. But, I just think you can't discount what happened in the first contest. So, yeah, it would have to be something where, it's just hard to fathom Notre Dame getting just torched by this Clemson team. I guess it's always possible with Trevor Lawrence, but I think that they're going to hang in there even if they don't win and make it respectable. They're a better defense than Clemson. I love Brent Venables, but Notre Dame is a better defense than the Clemson defense this year. Clemson, you got to give them the edge because of Trevor Lawrence, but Notre Dame's offense has been really good lately too.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I was just playing what if scenarios. I think I have Notre Dame in. I think they're going to lose the game, but I think they're going to get that 4 seed. I think Alabama is going to beat Florida. So I have it Alabama 1, Clemson 2, Ohio State 3, and Notre Dame 4. Another Ohio State Clemson game. which would be interesting in the semis. I know I'm sure you're going to write about this for ESPN, but at this moment in time, obviously depends, maybe what happens over the next 2 weekends. How do you see, what's your prediction for the playoff kind of playing out here?
Yeah, I'm with you with the exact order. I mean, you could certainly argue that Notre Dame should be 3 and Ohio State would be 4, but would you really want to have a third Notre Dame Clemson game, especially a rematch? I could see the committee certainly messing with that a little bit and putting the Irish against the Tide at the Sugar Bowl, and then Ohio State Clemson at the Rose Bowl, most likely, which would be really, really fun. Especially with the bad feelings, the way that game went, and all the calls, and Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence, and it would just be a lot of fun to see that matchup again. But I think that's exactly how it's going to go. And I think it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. It'll be interesting with Florida because they are the type of team, at least offensively, that can keep pace with Alabama. I just don't think they can stop Alabama's offense. I don't think they're good enough defensively. I really think the only teams in the country that might be able to are Notre Dame and Ohio State. I don't even think Clemson could stop Alabama the way that they're playing, and maybe nobody can. I mean, that's a realistic possibility. Is it Alabama with that? Because here's the thing about Bama: they shouldn't have an offensive line that's this good. Some of those guys should be in the NFL already, but they do. And they're able to capitalize on that and protect their quarterback and create rushing lanes and buy time to attack down the field. And they're just there's really no weakness of that offense. So that's how I see that going.
Yeah, I agree. And they don't even have Jalen Waddle, but I think Steve Sarkisian has taken that offense to gotten it up to with the times and gotten it where it needs to be. And I don't even know if right now, I would not say Ohio State can stop them. I think that could be a game where whoever has the ball last. Just Ohio State. My concern for Ohio State is I don't think they needed the games for the resume. I think they needed the games for the experience. And then they had a couple guys, starters, I think 3 starters out on defense last week due to COVID. And, they missed some practice time. And it looks like they're going to get those guys back. But to me, Ohio State going into the playoff with only 6 games under their belt and not having the chance to, you saw Alabama's defense against Ole Miss earlier this year. Look how they've developed throughout the year. Is that, if you're Ohio State, does that concern you, the fact that they're not going to have that as many, that body of work to be able to become the team that they maybe can be in a normal year?
Yeah, it's a great point. I asked Ryan Day that question earlier this week, where have you improved the most? And he said it's tough because we haven't played very much. I mean, we would be midway through our season normally, and then you have that second half to really figure out who you are. And so that's a great point that these other teams that have played more and started earlier and kind of evolved have a lot more to, those coaches have a lot more to sort of evaluate in terms of the development. And Ohio State in many ways is still figuring out what type of team that it wants to be and it can be. And the defense has been interesting, right? I mean, they're certainly not what they were in 18 when they were a mess. They're, I don't think, as good as they were last year. They're probably somewhere in between, but having the potential to be closer to last year's group. And that's what they're going to have to be, I think, to win a national championship, because Alabama is that good. I really do believe when it gets down to it that Ohio State and Alabama are the 2 best teams. Maybe I'm wrong about Clemson and they have another gear. Notre Dame is a really good team. I think they're going to, if they get in the playoff, they will avail themselves pretty well, at least better than they have before. But I really think those are the 2 best teams and the two teams that we'll see ultimately playing for a national title, unless they're matched up in the 1-4 game.
Yeah, our listeners would love to hear that. 2 more quick questions for you. One is just, I don't know what you've been hearing. Interesting point brought up on our message board today about the Rose Bowl. Obviously, some rules and laws laid out in the state of California, guidelines due to what's going on with COVID. I mean, the Niners had to move their home games. They're playing in Arizona. Is there a chance that the Rose Bowl doesn't happen in the Rose Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible. I'm actually out in California now, and it's not a great situation here, as it is not great where you are, or really where anybody is. But they obviously have been more aggressive with the restrictions. Now, it hasn't impacted LA County yet with the pro teams there, the Rams and the Chargers, and any other college teams that are going on right now. But it is something to monitor here if things don't get better throughout the state and throughout that area. I think they would try to do everything possible to have that game played at the stadium. I think it's about as safe an environment as you can have with teams that have gone through this type of testing and have the resources. It's not like you have fans. It's not like you have a rose parade, but definitely something to monitor. If I think everybody has to be open-minded about how this season ends, and maybe that game takes place in another area. Maybe it's in the Vegas, or maybe it's in Arizona, where the Rose Bowl is this year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, and that leads me into my final question. It's been an interesting year in college football. From conference only, adaptation to a conference only schedule, to the Big Ten canceling, then coming back again, and conferences starting and stopping at different times, and games being canceled every week. It's been crazy. And I know a lot of people across college football just feel like put an asterisk on the season, put an asterisk on whoever wins. It doesn't feel real. I know a lot of casual fans can't really get into it because of some of the start and stop. I asked Pete about this question. I was curious about your take too. What are your thoughts on this college football season as a whole? Who's ever crowned a champion? Are they, is that like, obviously it wouldn't be a real asterisk, but should there be an asterisk on it, or is this like a legitimate, college football champion here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a season that will always be looked at differently because of what you said, stopping and starting, and teams playing different numbers of games. It is good to see, most of the games that are conference games, and you could argue that a team that goes through an SEC schedule, or a Big 12 or an ACC schedule this year, that's a pretty legitimate team, and I do think there's a pretty good chance that the teams in the playoff are the best 4 teams, but it's not going to be looked at, typically like a normal season will be. It doesn't mean that there weren't accomplishments, though. I mean, you talked earlier, we talked about Indiana earlier. Like, what Indiana accomplished this year was real. Like, that was important for them and their growth of the program. Northwestern, the team that Ohio State will face in the Big Ten title, they were 3-9 last year. So, like, what they did this season, and they also had no COVID issues, impressive. And I could go down the line in other leagues. I think Texas A&M's improvement is real this year. Florida's improvement, I think, is real this year, but how the year will be viewed certainly won't be the same as a normal season.
Yeah, I agree. I think, though, the good thing is it's looking like, whether it's Ohio State or Florida, even Texas A&M, we're going to get 4 teams that I think would have been playoff worthy regardless of the COVID issues. So I'm really excited to see how the college football season plays out. Adam, you do a great job. Really appreciate you coming on the show. For everyone listening, go give him a follow on Twitter at ESPN Rittenberg. Really appreciate your time. Thanks again for coming on here.
All right, Alex, appreciate it, and stay safe, and hope you enjoy the weekend.
You too.